Ida May stood at the entrance to the General Hospital in Muskogee, Oklahoma. The date was July 22nd, 1933. The doctor had been to the house. He told her that it was very unwise for her to become pregnant when she was 42 years old. Now she was 43 and standing at the entrance of the hospital, having strange pains and wondering if everything was all right. There was no money for hospital stays. There was no money for doctors and medicines. And yet she stood in the doorway and wondered what she should do. Her overwhelming thought was that of the safety of the child. She had reason to be concerned. She had been pregnant before. There had been lots of children that had come before this one. And she knew what it felt like. She knew what to expect. And this was somehow different. Donald was the firstborn who had come in 1913, then Lucille in 1917. Russell came along in 1918, then John in 1920. Bert came in 1923. Carl had came in 1925. Mary had came in 1928. In 1930, she had Ted. Now, it's 1933, and she stood in the doorway, 9 months pregnant yet again. Ida May had been born on the 6th of April, 1891 in Lincoln, Arkansas. It was kind of a hardscrabble existence in Lincoln, Arkansas at that time with its dirt streets and its wooden sidewalks. It did, however, have a small cannery, this building right here, which canned the local apples. The railroad came to town soon after, but there was not enough business from the local ranchers with their apples or passengers from the station, and the railroad was soon abandoned. The one-room schoolhouse stands even today, exactly how it was when Ida would have went to school there. Even the desk where Ida May would have sat and the chalkboard that she would have worked out math problems on is still there today. After Ida May got out of school, her and Charles Wesley Thompson applied for a marriage license on the 17th of September, 1909. And apparently it was witnessed by Hayden Smith, and the application was approved by E.P. Watson. The young couple settled in a neighborhood of Lincoln called Star Hill. Charles never really had a trade. He wasn't a farmer, he wasn't a carpenter. He was kind of a jack of all trades, a handyman. He pumped a lot of gas in gas stations. He worked as a trimmer of fruit trees when that was needed. He never really aspired for greatness, even though numerous times in their lives together he lived in areas where there was oil booms going on, or there was different things going on that he could have learned and done. He was always very content just to work in a gas station. Paris, Texas was rivaling Dallas in size and growth. There was 5 railroads serving the town, and its businesses were booming. There were millionaires being made every day. It all changed on March 21st, 1916, when a fire swept through the city and completely destroyed it. Here is the First National Bank completely gutted. What had once been one of the fastest growing cities in America now lay in complete ruins. Charles and Wesley decided that they wanted to leave Lincoln and they wanted to go to Paris, Texas. It was late 1930 now, and they thought that since the town had been rebuilt and was growing again and was booming again, there may be opportunities for them there. So they loaded up their 8 children and they left to go to Paris, Texas. At the same time they were getting ready to leave to go to Paris, Texas, a phenomena started in America that was known as the Dust Bowl. For several years, drought had been brewing in mid-America, and it was getting worse and worse. And it couldn't have come at a worse time for the couple with their 8 children. One of the worst droughts on record had caused wind-borne dust in orders of magnitude which was unimaginable, and it covered all of the farm ground with dust and grit that made farming impossible, and there was no rain. All the businesses collapsed. It was an unbelievable time in American history. In the middle of the Great Depression, with Middle America experiencing a drought of unimaginable proportions, there began to be seen leaflets which were handed out trying to get people to come to California because there was jobs. And a mass migration started of 500,000 people leaving the central United States and going to California. They were known as Okies. 500,000 people taking what few belongings they had and leaving the unimaginable drought in Middle America and leaving for California. They had been living in small roadside refugee camps, which was known as Hoovervilles, after the American President Herbert Hoover. They went to Paris, Texas first, but they only stayed about a year because when the dust storms hit and the farming stopped and there was no work, they were no better off there than they were anywhere else. Heading west, they decided that they would go to Muskogee, Oklahoma, which they did. And Charles worked in a gas station, pumping gas. They stayed about a year. It wasn't any better than anywhere else. And it was here, during their stay in Muskogee, Oklahoma, that Ida Mae found herself standing in front of the General Hospital, 43 years old and pregnant, and unsure what to do. We find ourselves back at the General Hospital in Muskogee, Oklahoma, where Ida Mae had a little girl on the 24th of July, 1933. She was healthy, and now they had to figure out what they were going to do next. Ida Mae talked her husband into staying in Muskogee for a couple of years. She decided that she didn't want to travel anymore because things weren't better anywhere that they had been. And she couldn't imagine that if they continued traveling west, that things would get any better. They ended up eventually drifting their way west to Troutdale, Oregon, which the entire downtown area had been destroyed by fire in 1925, and the area was now booming. They were planting strawberry fields, and they were planting apple orchards, and industry was booming. They were discussing building an aluminum plant in Troutdale, and several people had said, "This is the place that you need to go. There will be work. There is a future in Troutdale, Oregon." Although they made the trip to Troutdale, and the little girl started school and went to kindergarten and first grade in Troutdale, Troutdale ultimately is not where they stayed. Now the buildup for World War II had begun, and they started building a military base in Morrow, California, to train soldiers for amphibious landings. And Charles was hired to work as a handyman at the military base, and so Morro Bay, California, is where they ended up. He worked at the military base, and he also pumped gas at a gas station on Saturdays and Sundays for $1 a day. They stayed in Morro Bay throughout World War II. It actually was one of the better times of their lives. There was food to eat, there was a roof over their head, and they weren't living hand to mouth. But as the war grew to an end, there was talk about shutting down the military base. So Charles and Ida Mae sat down and thought about what they were going to do next. Their daughter was now 12 years old, and they decided that they were going to move to the Central Valley in California, because with all the industry and with all the planting of orchards that was going on and all of the new factories opening, they decided that they could find jobs there. So they moved to the Central Valley, and Ida Mae and her 12-year-old daughter took a job in a turkey processing plant. They got a few cents to pluck a hen turkey, and they got a few more cents to pluck a tom turkey. And they would stand there all day long and pluck turkeys. And Charles worked once again pumping gas and odd jobs, and now they were living in Turlock, California. Now the war is over, and the soldiers are returning from Europe and from across the Pacific. And time passes, and it is now 1949. One day, Ida Mae's daughter met a man at a dance who had just returned from Europe. He had been in the Merchant Marines, and he had been gone from America for a very long time. Ida Mae Thompson was my grandmother. And this was the story of her daughter, now 15 years old, and just met a returning GI. Her name was Betty Darlene, and this was her story. She was my mother.